Welcome back to the Art Inside the Craft podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Glazier, and this is episode number 20. Today's guest has been called one of rock's finest narrative historians and is a New York Times bestseller. I first became interested in Alan Paul's writing back in the early 90s with Guitar World, and then with his book One Way Out, The Inside History of the Allman Brothers Band. We deep dive into his beginnings of writing, how his connection with the Allman Brothers Band began, his move to China, and the book that he co-wrote with another legendary writer and musician, Andy Aladort, titled Texas Flood, the inside story of Stevie Ray Vaughan. He also explains the secret of how Andy Aladort is such a phenomenal guitar player. So let's listen in on that interview now.
Yeah, so I got into music journalism just because I loved music and I loved journalism. So I started writing for my high school newspaper. I grew up in Squirrel Hill, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I went to Taylor Alderdice High School, and I was fortunate enough to, we had a great high school newspaper. So I started doing that in high school, and I didn't really do music. I just did whatever. I did lots of things. I won a National Writing Award my junior year for a story that profiled two cocaine dealers.
Wow.
It got me in a little bit of hot water, which is, I could do a whole interview just about that. But it was an interesting experience, and in a weird way, that little cocaine thing was a preview of the music journalism to come in some ways.
Wow.
I'm being a little facetious, but, I just was interested in journalism, and I did start doing some music stuff even then. But it was just because it was stuff I liked. So I would do like a little column on upcoming concerts or releases that I was excited about.
Yeah, cool.
And so, yeah, as I continued on, I went to University of Michigan. I worked at the Michigan Daily college newspaper. I did a lot of different things there. I did some sports reporting and some news reporting. And I was a creative writing major my first couple of years. And so I started being on the literary beat. And so I got to interview authors when they came to town, which was pretty often at Ann Arbor at the time, which was cool. So I got to interview Tom Wolfe and Allen Ginsberg and Joseph Heller of Catch-22.
Wow.
And they were all really cool experiences, some more than others. Joseph Heller kind of upbraided me because he could tell I hadn't read his books. And, it was a good lesson. I did do my research thoroughly. I'd go read articles and stuff, but he somehow caught on to me. Huh. And I've always tried to be really, really prepared. And that probably is part of the reason that reiterated that. And I started doing music way back then because I was really into blues. I actually worked starting my freshman year at Rick's American Cafe in Ann Arbor, which was a really cool music club that mostly had blues on weekends. It was on the circuit for Chicago blues people. So I saw Coco Taylor, Lonnie Brooks, Sun Seals, Albert Collins, Johnny Copeland, as well as people like NRBQ and Fishbone, Robert Cray. I saw there at the start of his career. So really, really cool stuff. And Buddy Guy was coming, and I went to the music editor and said, you ought to write about Buddy Guy. He's this awesome guitar player. His career was pretty much nowhere at the time, but he was still a legend. He was coming to play, in front of 100, 200 people or whatever at Rick's. And she said, yeah, that'd be great, but none of our music writers know anything about the blues. It was really oriented towards alternative music at the time. This was in the mid 80s. So she said, why don't you do it? And so I was like, sure. So I interviewed Buddy Guy, and I just loved it. I just loved it. I loved talking to him. I loved writing about him. And I never really looked back. I mean, I've continued to do all kinds of other stuff. And in my post-college career, I was looking for newspaper jobs, and I did some regular newspaper jobs as well. But I was always doing the music stuff on the side. And I found that I was better at it. And I think I was better at it mostly just because I was so enthusiastic. And it's obviously everybody, I think, does a better job if they're enthusiastic and excited and passionate about something. Yeah, if you love it. And I love all kinds of writing. I think of myself as a writer first and foremost. So I'll write about anything. I like writing about my life. When I went to China, I loved writing about, my life there and about China and about living abroad. And I love writing about raising my three kids. But in terms of interviewing people and getting down, I just, I've had an affinity for music, and, career takes you, your passion takes you to a career, and then your career takes you further, if that makes any sense. So
Yeah, for sure.
I've kept doing that. Yeah, but for about 10 years, from 2000 till 2010, I think, I was also a senior writer for Slam magazine and did a lot of basketball stuff as well. But, and that was a really, really fun time for me. And I love some of the stuff I did. But I guess in the terms of the overall arc of my career, it's kind of a blip. It's not where the heart of it lies. So, and then, I think the other things you had asked, how did I get my job at Guitar World, came completely out of the blue. It was an amazing experience. It saved me. It was life-changing because, I had graduated college. I worked for a year at a small newspaper in Hoboken. That job was cool. I learned a lot of stuff. I was also doing freelance writing on the side. I think it was during that. Well, no, it was a little after, but I started, I interviewed Lou Reed. I interviewed Robert Cray. I was writing,
Wow.
doing freelance writing and doing some cool stuff. But my real day job was editing this newspaper. I didn't really have any vision of how to make the music stuff my full-time job. And I moved down to Florida for a year with my girlfriend, who's now my wife. She had a job there. I was freelancing. I got a temporary job in New York. What was supposed to be a job. I came up back to New York. 2 weeks into the job, a funder pulled out of this publication and they killed the arts section. And I had been hired as the arts editor. So
Oh, man.
I was just driven up. I was living with relatives in New Jersey and coming into the city. And I was really depressed. And I just thought, I just can't do this. And the only job I was offered, I was set up by the editor of that paper, was at the New York Daily News, which sounds like a great job, right? But it was actually during a strike. And so what they wanted me to do was be a scab
Oh,
writer. And I refused. I just, I grew up in Pittsburgh. Like I said, I grew up in a union town. My father is a physician, not a union member, but his patients were all union people. My grandfather owned a lumber yard. I came from, in my mind anyhow, like a working class background and a union background. And even though, again, there was no union membership directly in my family, we grew up with like this tremendous respect for it. So
sure.
anyhow, crossing a picket line and being a scab was 100% out of the question. At that moment, it felt like my only option. And so I just gave up, and I started applying to grad school to become an English teacher. Actually, was my idea, and I would write on the side.
Hmm.
In the meantime, I had gotten a hold of Guitar World through somebody that tried to write for me at that little publication, and I was assigned 2 record reviews. I did them; they went well. I was really excited. I learned later when I started working at Guitar World that people would call us all the time for assignments, and we would just give anyone who called a record review. And what we realized is, most of the people just never even turned it in. And then the people who did, a lot of them were horrible. But also some of them were good. And so we would actually find some writers that way. It was like a no risk thing to do. But
Sure.
I didn't know that. In my mind, I had gotten an assignment for Guitar World, a magazine I loved. I was a guitar player. I read it. So I put my heart and soul into it, and I didn't have much else to do. So I rewrote, listened to the albums probably, 40 times. And I wrote these great record reviews. And then I moved back to Florida, and I was waiting for grad school. I just took the GREs. I was doing all that stuff. And I got a call from one of the editors at Guitar World, and he said, "Hey, I know you just moved back to Florida, but we have a job opening here, and I'd like to recommend you for it, but I'm not going to do it unless you would move back. Would you move back?" And I was like, "Yes, totally, tomorrow."
Cool.
And so, yeah, they hired me, and, I never, I have a letter somewhere from the Harvard School of Education that my application was never completed because I didn't send the check in. I just dropped the whole thing
Oh, very
and
cool.
never looked back. Yeah.
Huh. That's really incredible. I I'm glad to hear you say that because I write album reviews for Ink 19 magazine, ink19.com. I do the same thing. Like I get an album and I swear it's nothing that I don't do anything but listen to that for like 2 weeks straight. And I'm sure that they're just like, come on, man, just write the review and send it in. But for me, it's like it's too personal and too important to just rush through, you know? So
Yeah, well, it really paid off for me. It was how I approached things, and I think the article that really got me hired at Guitar World and they caught their attention when they, beyond those reviews I did for them, was a piece I did on the Allman Brothers for Tower Pulse magazine.
ah,
Pulse was a magazine that was distributed free in Tower Records, which was, huge at the time and really
yes.
a pretty good magazine. And did a lot of writing for them. Like during all that period I was talking about, I was freelancing for them, and it was great, but a lot of it was smaller stuff. When I heard that the Allman Brothers had a record coming out, I begged with my editor there to let me do it,
Hmm.
and they were like, "Oh, sorry, we already assigned it." And then they called me. The other guy had a conflict, and anyhow, I got it,
Oh,
and
cool.
I just went all in. That's when I lived in Florida. I had time. I went out and bought the Dreams box set, which had just come out,
Oh yeah.
and I listened to it over and over and over. I knew most of the music, but I re-immersed myself. And I interviewed Greg, I interviewed Dickie Betts, I interviewed Warren and Alan Woody, who were the new members,
Hmm.
and then I kept going. I interviewed producer Tom Dowd, I interviewed Phil Walden, who was the original manager,
Right.
and it really was the best story I'd ever written to that point, but by a large margin. And it, turned out to be a very influential thing because it put me on the map with the Allman Brothers in ways that I at that moment could not have imagined or had any concept that would be an ongoing,
Yeah.
30 plus year relationship.
Well, that's kind of a perfect segue because my next question, I'm, also a huge Allman Brothers fan, and I'm currently waiting through the audio from an interview with Kirk West. So, what was kind of, I guess, the spark that got you, that you decided to go ahead and write a full book, One Way Out, about them?
Well, you know, it, the answer should be it was the obvious thing to do. They're a great band and had a great book. I
Of
loved
course.
them. I had a lot of access and interviews, and I'd be an idiot not to do it. But I was kind of an idiot, and I didn't think of it for years. I really didn't. And after my first book, Big in China, which was about my time living in China, which I know we kind of skimmed over that, but you
Yeah.
had asked why we went. It was my wife was an editor at the Wall Street Journal, and sort of almost as out of the blue as that Guitar World job, she got the job as the China bureau chief for the Wall Street Journal. She
Ah,
had no prior China experience. That was just the right place at the right time because person who was supposed to do it had a problem and couldn't go. So
wow.
she threw her hat in the ring at my urging, which she was surprised I would do that. But I had this incredible experience in China. I sort of turned away from all this music writing. I became more of a performer. I formed a band there, played all over with three Chinese guys and one other American. We recorded an album, was on radio and TV in China. It was an incredible experience. So I wrote a book about it. And I sort of thought I was done with a lot of this other stuff and moving to the next phase of my life. But just a few months after I moved back in January 2009, and in March, it was the Allman Brothers 40th anniversary, and they did that incredible run at the Beacon.
Oh, yeah.
And, I had stayed connected with Guitar World through all that time. I did writing even from China and whatever. And Brad Tolinsky, my good friend and longtime editor at Guitar World, basically called me up and said, "Hey, it's the Allman Brothers 40th anniversary. Why don't we do something?" And I was like, sure. So I did a cover story for Guitar World on that, which was able to utilize some of my old reporting, but also did a lot of new interviews. And the story was great. It gave me an excuse to go back through all my old archives. And I got the idea like, I should keep going with this. I mean, it was 5 years from that until One Way Out actually came out. But that sparked the idea. And I guess I had to put out my Big in China book and go through that whole process a little bit. And by the end of it, and I was thinking, what am I going to do next? That was just sort of staring me in the face as something I, could and should do. So
Yeah.
I went for it. And you mentioned an interview with Kirk West. I should just throw out that, my friendship and relationship with Kirk is really what brought me to the inside circle of the Allman Brothers. It's a question I get asked a lot. How did I end up with such access and stuff? And really, it was through Kirk, and it was through. I had 25 years, I guess, or 20. I'd have to sit and count, which I'm not going to do, but 20 plus years of experience of interviewing these guys and being around them before I even contemplated or started writing a book. And, it's not that had a long game thinking I'm going to write a book, but on the other hand, like, you need that much time to be trusted. Guys like Dickie Betts and Greg Allman, they have been around so much. They've been so ripped off, felt abused by journalists, sometimes rightfully, sometimes I think that, not rightfully their feelings, but,
Sure.
they had a lot of experiences, and they are slow to open up and trust people. And by me writing so many stories and then being able to see, and me coming around, and I was playing the long game in the sense that if I didn't try to like write sensational things that might have gotten me a lot of attention for a week, but then I would have been banned
Right. Yeah.
from there. So, I treaded that line of, I never, any access I've ever gotten to the Allman Brothers or anyone else, I've always thought of it that I'm just like, I'm there for you. I never lose sight of the fact that I'm a journalist, I'm a reporter, I'm a scribe. I'm there for the reader and to observe things and to tell a story. And that's what I really like to do. So I think of myself more as a storyteller, an observer, and someone who can try to get to the heart of things. Not so more so than like being a critic.
And that does really come through. I'm actually waiting on Texas Flood to show up in the mail right now, but obviously I've read One Way Out, and that really does come through. That's what you're there for, is to kind of serve the story and get their side of it out more than like you said, get those salacious tidbits and then be on the outs.
I'm excited for you to read Texas Flood. I think in some ways it's better book, to be honest. But I mean, just because, well, one, I knew what I was doing more, because I had the experience of having done this. Two, it's a more simple story, and I don't mean like that Stevie Ray's story is simple, because it's poetic and profound and cinematic, which is why it's made for such a great book. Yeah. But it's one person's story, and everybody else's vision is sort of told in the service of Stevie's story, which isn't to say their stories aren't interesting. I mean, Jimmy Vaughn's life is fascinating, and like the first 40, 50 pages of the book are practically a bio of Jimmy, because you can't understand Stevie until you understand that. Tommy Shannon, bass player for Stevie, his story is incredible. He played at Woodstock with Johnny Winter and then ended up like, completely broken down, addicted to drugs, unemployed, in jail, in halfway houses. And he told us this stuff. But it's all the story of Stevie. The Allman Brothers is the story of so many people. It's the story of Dwayne. It's the story of Greg. It's the story of Dickie. It's the story of Barry Oakley. It's the story of Warren Haynes and everyone else who passed through. And so it was sometimes, it's a challenge to keep that story focused, because you have to have enough information and understanding of all those people. And I didn't mention J-Mo and Butch, who of course are as important as anyone, really. Yeah. Everyone is as important as anyone. So that's the challenge there, and I do feel good about what I did, but I'm no different than anyone else. I think that every writer and every artist feels like they would like a chance to redo everything they ever did. So, and I'll admit that I'm there as well.
I'm discovering that as I'm going through a bunch of old interviews. I was actually just editing one last night, and I'm like, man, why didn't I get the audio better? Or why didn't I ask this? But you live and learn.
Oh yeah, I mean, one of the things I've done through the pandemic, I'm still in the middle of it, actually, is digitizing a lot of my old cassette interviews.
Oh,
and
great.
It's wonderful. I don't know what I'm going to do with them exactly. Some of them for sure I'm going to find a way to share. But I'm going to also have to, I'm going to have to like get over the fact that some of them, especially with some of the older ones, it's like painful for me to listen to myself. Just
Yes.
sometimes I just talk too much, or I ask bad questions, or I miss follow-up questions. That's actually a thing that drives me the craziest.
Hmm.
Where I'm like, no, no, wait, ask them about.
Yeah,
Especially for the people who are deceased now,
sure.
which sadly I have plenty of. So I do listen to some of those, and I'm like, I can't believe I had so and so on the phone. I didn't ask them such and such.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of a nice segue into the Texas flood. So like I said, the mine's ordered, it's coming. But I wanted to ask, first of all, how, I mean, obviously you and Andy have kind of worked together. Andy Aladort have worked together in the past, but how did you guys, I guess, kind of decide to work together on that particular
Mhm.
project?
Well, basically, what happened was, so One Way Out came out. It was successful, and so I had to. What am I going to do next? I had briefly thought about doing something really different, and then I thought, well, why reinvent the wheel? I love doing this. And this worked, and what else could I do? But it's hard to come up with another artist who I think is as worthy as the Allman Brothers and worthy of my time and had a great story, and story hadn't been told in everything else. And I kept coming back to Stevie, and I had written a really extensive Guitar World cover story on Stevie as well, that based around the box set that came out, and in about 2000, and I interviewed a lot of people for that, and I had become pretty close with Jimmy in 1995 when I went down to Austin for the tribute to Stevie Ray he put on and covered it for Guitar World. Um, but I had one big problem with Stevie. I never interviewed him.
Oh,
Unfortunately, he died in August 2000. I started working at Guitar World in February 2001, so just really a few months later. And I'm sorry, I'm saying 2000. It's 1990, of course, in
yeah.
1991. Yeah, sorry, I was a decade off there. So Stevie died in August of 1990. I started working at Guitar World in February 91, to be clear. And so anyhow, I had never interviewed him, and I had used in that story I wrote for Guitar World stuff from Andy Alador's interviews. We're friends. We both work for Guitar World, and so it was, Andy gave me access to that stuff as just part of the team. And so if I was going to write a book, I wanted to have those interviews. And it's not because just that they're interviews with Stevie. They're great interviews with Stevie.
Mhm.
Andy is a great guitar player. He played with Stevie a little bit before he ever interviewed him, which I think is significant because that's how do you relate to Stevie Ray Vaughan? Well, by playing guitar with
By
him.
playing guitar.
Yeah. So, and then the interviews that followed, I think were extra good because of that, in my opinion. So basically, I just called Andy. I said, "Hey, I'm going to write a book about Stevie Ray Vaughan. I have a publisher who wants it, and I want your Stevie Ray interviews." And I didn't know if he, it's a lot of work and commitment to write a book. I didn't know if Andy wanted to go all in. I was open to that, and I was open to if he didn't, just like working out a licensing deal where I'd pay him something and give
Mm.
him, give him credit. I hadn't really figured out how to do that, but it never became an issue because he wanted to go all in. So we partnered on it. There's some ways that writing a book together was really challenging, um, because it's a very personal thing. We're both, busy. Andy had a lot of other stuff going on, so to get focus at the same time could be hard. But in the end, it took a little while for us to figure out our system.
Hmm.
But in the end, from a reader's perspective, I think all you should really care about is the book is better for us having both worked on it. Partly because it was like having an editor. I mean, every single thing he put in the book, I would read and question. And sometimes we'd fight about stuff and take it out, and vice versa. I mean, it wasn't one sided. To be, it's both of us. So it was sort of like it was like having an editor, like a moment by moment editor,
Hmm.
instead of it wasn't like writing stuff and then having it read. It was like being edited as it went. Anything he added, I was all over.
Hmm.
Anything I added, he was all over. So you had to think about things more from the start, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, definitely.
So yes, I think it was good. And there were also times where, one of us would be getting an interview with someone that we've been trying to get and getting through that and figuring it out, and the other could be working on something else. So it made it a little bit more efficient in that way, although probably overall was less efficient in the sense that we talked about things so much instead of just doing them. Yeah, but all that talking paid off. I feel really good about where we ended up and that we did it together.
I don't know if you've kind of already answered this, but in the same way you did with the Allman Brothers, but what was it that you were, I guess, not seeing out there already? Because, I mean, like I read on your page that this was really the first time that like Jimmy and the guys in the band
Right.
had kind of opened up to somebody about that experience. So,
Right. Well, similar to the Allman Brothers, where I mentioned that I had all these many years of experience with them that got them allowed them to trust me. Andy and I both had that. Andy has had a very close relationship in the last 20 years or so with Tommy Shannon and Chris Layton. He's recorded with them. He's done a whole bunch of work with them and with Jimmy on Stevie Ray Vaughan reissues and liner notes. So they knew him. I also had a very long relationship with him, especially with Jimmy. Not quite as in depth as Andy's, but more in depth than most. So we had that. They really had never said their piece in a book. Jimmy had never cooperated with anything. It's still very painful for him.
I'm sure.
From the beginning, Jimmy, to summarize, when we first talked to him about it, he said, I'm not sure I'm going to talk to you for this or not, because I don't know if I, want to deal with this. I wish there wasn't a book being done because it just stirs it all up for me. But I'm glad that you're doing it if there's a book, because I trust you guys.
Wow.
And it took, probably a year from when we first talked to him about it until he actually started doing new interviews with us. But he was helping us indirectly from the start, because there's a lot of people that we started contacting who literally wouldn't talk about Stevie for a book unless Jimmy said it was okay.
Oh, wow.
Including relatives, including some bandmates, ex-bandmates, and whatever. And Jimmy gave us the thumbs up. So people were contacting, saying, "Is it okay to talk to these guys?" And Jimmy said yes. And so the word got around Austin and around the world of Stevie Ray Vaughan that Jimmy says it's okay to participate. There's no problem with it from him. And that was really, really helpful. So he was very, his approval was helpful before he was actually cooperating. And then once he did start talking to us, he was incredibly insightful. And he told us some things about Stevie, about himself, about his family that he had never talked about before. So, I felt really good about that. And I think Stevie and the Allman Brothers are similar, to get back, I think, to directly answering your question, in that, they both had these incredible stories that had sort of been told for years, but there hadn't really been a definitive book. With the Allman Brothers, there was Midnight Riders, which the band really didn't approve of and didn't like. But I think is a pretty good book. But it has its limitations, and it didn't really include anything in the 90s of note, because it came out, in the middle of that.
Right.
There was a whole lot of history after that book had been published. And the author had done a series of interviews with the core members while the band was broken up, but he had no more further access to them once he started writing the book.
Sure.
So I don't think it's a terrible book at all, which some people in that Allman Brothers camp would say, but it had its limitations, and there was more to say. And with Stevie, there's a book called Crossfire that came out like a year or two after Stevie died. I thought it was pretty good. He had no cooperation from anyone in the inner circle. No Jimmy, no Double Trouble, almost no family members. And so, we had all of that. And plus, we had a 30 years perspective on Stevie.
Sure.
So I think that we all knew, everybody who ever saw Stevie Ray Vaughan, or I guess even listened to Stevie Ray Vaughan, knew that he was incredible talent. But sometimes it's hard to see someone who's a contemporary in the light of the all-time greats. And I think 30 years after his death, it's clear that he was in fact one of the all-time greats. He wasn't just great for a guy you could go see Saturday night or whatever, whatever. And just, a little bit of time and distance puts that into perspective, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't honestly remember a time since I picked up the guitar at 12 years old that I wasn't either listening to the Allman Brothers or Stevie Ray Vaughan or Jimmy in his various bands, and so that's just incredible that you've had the access and the ability to kind of write those stories somewhat from the inside, and I mean, I just really appreciate that the work that you're doing
Thank you.
with those guys.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you appreciating it. And it's like, in all sincerity, I take it as I take it as like an obligation. It's like I do understand that it's an honor, and it's a serious thing. I mean, there have been times for people, like old timers around the Allman Brothers, there's always a certain level of criticism I've gotten from people who are like, "You never met Dwayne, how can you write this book?" And it's like, well, I mean, people write books about Julius Caesar and
Right.
Ulysses S. Grant and Abraham Lincoln and George Washington, and nobody says you didn't meet them. You can't write the book. I mean, there's, and I'm fortunate in these cases to have a mix of both, because I, certainly did know, Greg and Butch and every other member of the Allman Brothers except Dwayne and Barry. But in the same with Stevie, I knew everyone except Stevie, and that's a big accept. But that's what writing and reporting and journalism is. That's what history is, and so it's, if you take your job seriously, which I feel like I do and always have done, you overcome that. It's not, I'm not pretending that I was in the first row at the Fillmore. I mean,
Yeah.
I was 5 years old when Fillmore was recorded, so I wasn't there. But I think it's something that can be overcome,
Yeah.
and I do take it really seriously. I mean, that's just the thing I would say. I feel like I take what I do as seriously as, if you're like the White House reporter for the New York Times or Wall Street Journal or whatever, you need to treat it with respect and take it seriously. And that's how I feel.
And I mean, it seems like obviously with, the Allman Brothers, all you have to do is go online and you will find out how fanatical people are, and how protective they are of, the original six band. But, you're doing the best you can with not having those guys there. And it's some of the greatest, I think the greatest interviews and information out there is coming from you. So
Yeah, thank you very much.
yeah.
I appreciate that. It's it's interesting. It's fun. There's always, it's funny because there was a time where, like, I didn't take the band Little Feat really seriously, because Lil George was, I mean, I love the original Little Feat. But I was like, I don't want to go see Little Feat. Lil George is dead. He's the band. And I thought that with the band at one point when Robbie Robertson, when they reformed without him. And that's like ridiculous. And then I reflected on it. And I thought, I've had my whole career based on, the Allman Brothers post Dwayne Allman. And,
Right.
they've added Chuck Liddell, they added Warren, they've done all these things, and they've transformed, and they're an incredible band. And Little Feat are too. And the band was too. So, I came around on that. Thank God. And I just think it's it's really important to keep an open mind, about bands and about everything in life, really.
Right.
But as reflected, to this conversation in particular, to music and to use your ears and, I mean, sure, there's a scenario and there are bands where they could add a lame guitarist and say, that's not the Allman Brothers, they're lame. But that's not what they did. That's not what happened.
Yeah.
And so you need to judge everything by what's actually happening, not your vision of what might have happened. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. And and I have to, of course, mention that Scott's now playing with Little Feat, and man, that guy, his attention to detail is incredible. It's just he posts stuff all the time about how songs should be played, and he just posted something the other day about he's been playing one of their songs wrong and kind of explained how the guitar's set up. And
I saw that actually.
That's
no, that's absolutely right. And it's like Scott and Andy, who played with Dickie Betts for 12 years.
Yeah,
it's the same. And it's the exact same thing that I was just talking about, related directly to music instead of writing. But it's the same exact concept, which is what you're talking about is like being really serious and treating it with respect. And it's like, I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to think of the right analogy, but Little Feat and the Allman Brothers and Greg Allman and Dickie Betts and everyone, they are artists, just like Shakespeare or Monet or whatever. And so when you have the opportunity to play with them, you treat it like that. You treat it seriously. You don't take it, and the reason that Scott is so good at it, and Andy and Peter Levin and people like that, is they treat it that seriously, but they breathe life into it. They don't treat it like it's in the museum,
right?
That it's bound and it's stuck in amber. So it's like a fine line to treat it like that fine art, but also to tackle it like you're going to do it, like it's your thing too.
Right.
There's a really fine line there, but these guys that we're talking about, they tread that fine line, and that's what makes them special and unique, and why we love them so much.
Yes. I'll sidetrack us for one more little thing, and then I've got one question, and then I'll let you go.
Sure.
So I had probably, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, a 15-minute encounter with Andy up at Applehead Studios. And it was during the time that Rich had invited all the guys in, Mark and Sven and,
right.
Nico and those guys to come record that album that kind of became the unofficial First Magpie Salute album. And
right.
And I was in the control room, and after Andy had his interview with the guys, he kind of came in there and was talking to Michael Birnbaum that kind of does a lot of the stuff there, co-owner out there. And everybody else kind of wandered outside and was talking to, Rich and all the guys that were kind of hanging around. And I just kind of sat there and picked his brain, 10, 15 minutes. I thanked him for the interview, how incredible his questions were. And it was just an incredible experience for me just to kind of sit down for just a short amount of time and just learn a year's worth of questions I would be able to ask him in that one moment. And
right. That's cool. Well,
he's amazing.
Yeah. Andy is a very, very, as you know, and anyone who pays attention knows, he's incredibly knowledgeable about music and about guitar. And he's like America's guitar teacher. There was a period there. Yeah, the period from I don't know. I'm making up the date, so I could be off. But from like 1988 to 2008 or something, where he just he taught a majority of people who learned how to play guitar, learned things from Andy, and they still are to a huge extent. So it's pretty cool. And he's another one who transcends a lot of lines. He's also a writer, and he's such a great player who has a lot of personality and style in his playing.
Yeah.
But then can really break it down. I mean, a lot of people who are great teachers aren't great players. A lot of people who are great players aren't great teachers. it's not always completely compatible, but Andy just, excels at both. So, again, that's what made him such a great partner, or part of what made him such a great partner,
Yeah,
for Texas Flood.
it's kind of funny to watch his live streams that he'll do like through Facebook, and people will just pop in and be like, play Purple Haze, and he'll just play it, and then he'll be like, oh wait, I gotta adjust this thing, and he'll change something, and it sounds just like it, and then they'll say, play an Allman Brothers, okay, and then he'll rip off like half of some incredible solo, and you're just like, my gosh, how does this guy do all this stuff? It's nuts.
Well, I'll tell you part of how he does it. I mean, ultimately, you can never totally explain uh, anything, right? It's like any kind of greatness, and I would use that to describe Andy's playing, but he plays all the time, every day, a lot.
Wow.
In a way that I never ever have. And it's one of many differences between us as players. I've thrown myself into writing and reading and listening, and I love music and I love playing guitar, and I certainly have put in some time on it, but I've never had that drive. I've never had the patience to do that. And it's part of the skill. It really is. And any of the greats you talk to Warren Haynes, and believe me, he's put in his time. And it's like, very few people are born with incredible skills. I mean, there are people who have perfect pitch or whatever, and things that are incredibly helpful, but every great musician, just like every great athlete you watch, put in tons of time to make it look so easy and effortless.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, not long ago, I actually just talked to Larry Campbell, and it's the same thing. He said he gets up every morning and grabs a mandolin or a violin or a guitar or a banjo or whatever he's trying to tackle that day, and he just sits there and plays it and hones that craft even more.
Yeah, no, it's an ongoing, endless thing for these guys, and I realized that pretty early about myself, that I didn't have that. I don't have that. I don't have the patience. I don't have the compulsive personality, and it's just not, and so I realized that pretty early about myself, that music was going to be something I always loved and continued to do, but I never was going to be one of the greats. And so if I'm going to be one of the greats, it would have to be in something adjacent, which, is what I've tried to do, because it really is part of the skill set is that drive. It's like when Andy and I, when Texas Flood came out, we were down in Austin at the end of the first week, and we had an incredible event that booked people in Austin. Tommy Shannon was there and signed books with us. And that night we had an event at Sea Boys Club where we played, and Tommy played with us, and W.C. Clark and all kinds of people. And on our way in, Andy said to me, I hope I can do this. My playing is terrible. I haven't played in 3 days and touched my guitar because we've been so busy. And I said, come on, Andy, stop it. But he wasn't joking or fishing for compliments. He was, because for him to have not touched his guitar for a few days because we were so busy, driving around Texas and promoting our book, it really put him in like a weird place.
Wow.
He's like, I don't know if I can play. And I was like, Andy, first of all, you're going to be 100% awesome. And second of all, if you are like 10% diminished, you're still, it's going to be incredible and nobody will notice.
Nobody would notice.
Yeah. But I've heard things like that from all the greats that we're talking about. Again, like it's just something, it was an interesting insight for me during those years where I worked for Slam and interviewed basketball players. A big part of what I did was the old school story. So I interviewed, Alex English, Larry Bird, Bill Russell, Clyde Frazier, all the guys that I loved when I was a kid, basically, and even older. But what came through over and over with them was that same compulsion and desire and drive to make themselves better and to improve themselves. And even with people like Michael Jordan, who are such marvelous athletes, it's easy to just think they just go out and play, and it's just not true. It's just never the case, and it's not the case with all your favorite musicians either. It really comes from hard work,
Yeah.
and of course, creativity and everything else that you need. But all of that stuff doesn't get anywhere without the hard work.
Yeah. Well, the last thing I kind of wanted to ask you about is, or just kind of mention is, I'm really enjoying the lowdown and dirty emails, and I think you're already kind of super active with your fan base through social media, and I was just kind of curious, like, is this just another way for you to kind of cut through all the social media stuff and get your content directly to your fans, or what was kind of your impetus behind the
Thanks.
emails?
Yeah, thanks. So, a mix of things. I do like interacting with people, and social media is really valuable for that. But I also kind of was getting sick of just like providing so much content to Facebook, just like this $1 billion company, and I don't get paid for it,
Right.
which is fine. I mean, that's part of the deal. It's been really helpful to me in my career, and so it's all good. I have no complaints about it. But I just am sort of like looking at it from a little bit outside and going, well, and I'm not getting paid for the Lowdown and Dirty blog either, by the way. But at least I'm sort of controlling it, and nobody else is getting paid for it. And I feel like I can write at more length. And so I am doing a lot of music related posts. I mean, yesterday was Eric Clapton's 76th birthday, and I edited and put up a story on the making of Layla because I had it, but running a big story like that on Facebook or whatever wouldn't make sense, and I'm finding Substack to be a pretty cool vehicle for doing more long form stuff. And the formatting of it allows you to really easily put in photos and more excitingly videos. And I think it's since I'm writing so much about music, mostly other people's music, but to some extent my own and my experiences, it's just cool to be able to put in clips of the actual stuff. And I have been digitizing all these interviews, and they do have sort of a podcast audio feature. And I don't know exactly how or when I'm going to do it, but sooner or later I'm going to start sharing more audio as well.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I always enjoy that when they pop in because, like you say, it definitely gives you a little more control and you can put in more stuff than, you would over on Facebook or another platform. So I'm really enjoying that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's just a mix. I don't have any grand master plan, and truthfully, I usually don't. I've been fortunate that I'm sort of improvising it, and most of the time it works out. And sometimes I waste some time spinning my wheels and going down dark, deserted streets. But for the most part, these things have worked out for me. So I just keep trying new things, and I'm really enjoying this. And I hopefully the audience will keep growing, and I'll keep doing more and different things.
Thank you again to Alan Paul for the time and sharing some of his stories with me. I can't suggest enough that you get on his email list and follow along with his social media and writing for the Wall Street Journal. It's just incredible to me that a fellow music fan is covering such a wide range of important musicians for all of us to appreciate. I would also suggest you grab any and all of his 3 books as they are beautifully written, and Alan really has a knack for getting to the heart of the things fans want to know about the artists he interviews. As always, I have to thank my sponsor, Black Hat Bone Productions, and my Instagram and website will both be linked if you want to follow along with the most recent concert photographs or writing. Up next is my episode with Alan's co-author, Andy Aladort, and it's just as fantastic as this one turned out. So stay tuned, and I'll catch you all down the road.